I've always really loved 4X strategy games, but sadly was never able to fully delve into the more diplomatic parts of it. So for me, when I first heard of a Warhammer 40,000 4X game, I was reasonably excited due to the fact that a Warhammer 40k game would eliminate my biggest barrier to entry in terms of the 4X strategy genre. This game is published by Slytherin Entertainment and developed by Proxy Studios. Proxy being a rather small indie team that has only been attached to 3 projects, including Gladius. Those 3 projects are Conquest, Divide and Conquer, Pandora, First Contact, and most recently, Warhammer 40,000, Gladius, Relics of War. Let's get into the game itself, shall we? Gladius Prime was a once lush and fertile world, a thriving planet under Imperial rule, with a whole chapter of Space Marines that called Gladius Prime their home, and an Astra Militarum regiment stationed on the planet. They felt pretty safe until the orcs came. Then a warp storm hit. Then the Necrons woke up. Oh no. You can, as of writing this video, play as the following factions: Space Marines, Imperial Guard, Necrons, Orcs, and Tyranids. And a 6th faction will be officially released a day after this video will be up in the form of Chaos Space Marines. 40k Gladius is a pretty simple 4X game, as it, as mentioned earlier, more or less completely stripped away all diplomatic elements from the game. Every player who doesn't start the game on the same team as each other are immediately at war. The goal is to be the last faction or last team standing on the world of Gladius. Yeah, that's it. I find it hard to criticize the game for having a lack of diplomacy features, because, I sort of prefer it that way, but also because it's Warhammer 40k. Necrons and Space Marines wouldn't work together, even if it was to kill an overwhelming force of Tyranids.
If you're feeling suicidal, you've come to the right place.
The balancing in the game is overall pretty simple. A unit is effective versus another type of unit, so it's pretty easy to tell who you're going to want attacking who. Some units are good at anti-infantry, some are good at anti-tank, others anti-air, and a few select units are effective against all. But what do each of the factions play like? Well, that part is especially simple. I can pretty effectively boil them down to a few different keywords: melee horde, elite heavy infantry, shitty but numerous, numerous but shitty, and fortified position. They basically play like how you would assume they would based on their lore. The game has a ton of world options, as 4X games tend to, and each faction has their own sort of mini campaign of quests that they can do to give them rewards during the early to mid game. In terms of graphics, the game is pretty indie looking. By that I mean kind of bad. The fidelity definitely reminds me of a low poly 3D rendering of old 40k models from the 80s. Size scaling is a bit off in places, and several models are more or less completely faceless. However, it's hard to fault them for this because from what I can tell, the game's team comprises less people than Dark Eldar have super heavy vehicle support options. And considering the circumstances of the game's development and the pace at which new content is released for the game, I'd say this is more than acceptable. In fact, I'd say this is downright impressive. But the important question is whether or not it's worth the money. And honestly, not really at full price. Over $30 for 4 distinct factions and what is effectively one game mode isn't really worth the dollars. Especially when you have way less freedom to customize as you do in other 4X games like Civilization or Stellaris. This is definitely a game you're gonna want to wait until it's on sale for, or save up the extra money to get the extra content that comes with the Complete Edition. The Reinforcements Pack and Khorne Lord of Skulls DLC both add a lot to the game, But seriously, just don't buy the game at standard asking price. I give this, let's say, 2 Codex Officio Assassinorums out of a Codex Genestealer Cults. Subscribe and stay tuned for the first episode of Survival Guide to the Imperium. It'll be done soon. Maybe. Possibly.